it's extremely important. I mean, understanding the role that the river plays in other communities across the country or waterfronts, downtown. It's a huge economic opportunity. It's also a place where people can kind of come and call their own. So I think it's extremely important to the development of our city.
I think the Grand River is important to the community because it's the center of our city. It represents who we are. Our name is Grand Rapids, and so there's a lot of history there. If you learn about the history of Grand Rapids, you'll see a lot of the stuff that was connected by the river or how the community was split by the river. And so it's just a great opportunity for us to have a place to go where folks can engage with one another and build community with one another.
Well, I would love to see it be a destination for all residents to be able to enjoy, but I'd also love to see tree canopy up. I'd love to see native plants, native species. I want to make sure that we protect all the way up through the water system, storm sewer. It's important that every resident don't dump any oil in there, don't put all the fertilizers on your lawn and everything that we're washing into the Grand River. We want to be good to the environment because climate change is going to make it much harder on the river and the plants and the fish and everything.
It's my river.
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 My name is Ned Andre and it's my river.
Buenas tardes and good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing this great, cloudy and rainy afternoon? Water for the river, right? So, I just want to introduce myself really quickly. Adnoris Bo Torres. It is great to be with you all this afternoon. And I was at this event. I was at Rock the Block last summer. And it was great to see the great time that people were having connecting about the river, the role that it could play in the future of the river, the ways that it would impact our communities throughout the future of the work that we are doing here. There's real excitement and hope around the river today. For decades, this waterway has been dammed up, polluted, walled off from community. We haven't really understood where it begins, how it flows, and the way that it has shaped the prosperity or the lack of prosperity for many here. The riverbanks are lined with blighted and isolated properties, but the idea of knocking out the dams and putting the rapids back into the Grand Rapids catalyzed an aspirational community conversation. Today, we envision our namesake rapids flowing again through the heart of our community. We see riverbanks that are welcoming and green places for kids and for people to use and enjoy. The vision is to build a beautiful and active river corridor, not just in, for, and in the downtown space, but in a way that connects our neighborhoods and neighboring communities with waterways, more parks, a wide variety of opportunity in meaningful ways. The Grand River Corridor revitalization effort proposes to bring new economic, ecological, and cultural activity back into and around our waterway. An investment to build and activate that revitalized river corridor should help and benefit many of our local communities, as many as possible. Today, we welcome back our friend Daniel Talelian. Many of you have gotten to know Daniel over the past year. He and his team have been doing thoughtful and genuine work in our community to define what we mean by equity in the context of the river corridor revitalization efforts. I believe there's a broad agreement that we should pursue an equitable approach to the river corridor and its revitalization. Without a shared understanding of what that equity truly means, however, we risk misunderstanding each other and squandering away opportunities as we move forward on this generational effort. So today, Daniel will present the findings of the work that we have done to establish a common understanding for river equity, the important plans and the actions that will entail. Daniel brings considerable experience with a worldview and talent to this conversation, as he has helped lead similar efforts to revitalize the Los Angeles River Basin, as well as other projects around the country. Before I turn this over to Daniel, though, I want to emphasize that this idea of river corridor revitalization is truly a long-term, transformational project for our community. That is not a thought project in any way. This is not a performative piece in any way, and this is real. In that, no one organization or community group can do it alone. This requires all of us working together to make the most of this once-in-a-generation opportunity. As Daniel presents the goals and strategies for the equity framework, I think that you'll hear that there are many ways for community leaders and organizations, as well as those that are at the grassroots, to be involved and connected to this work. Indeed, many of us in this room are already doing the great work that it leads to what it wants for our community. We just need support ramping up the efforts to deliver great, true impacts. If that's the case, I welcome this opportunity to connect, to explore, and to collaborate on these opportunities. We often talk about a river for all, and we try to explain what that means. But I encourage you all to think that this is a river by all, because it will take all of us working together to achieve true outcomes for our community. After our conversation with Daniel, we'll have time for Q&A, but please join me in welcoming our friend, our colleague, and the great mind that is Daniel Tololian.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good day. So I'm going to run through just a little bit of level setting context. I know for some folks it'll feel a little repetitive. For some folks it'll feel a little new. I just want to sort of level set that. And then my job here today is really to just share out at a high level sort of an executive briefing of what we're sort of referring to as the River Equity Framework document. Does that sound good? All right, let's go for it. Thank you. Okay, so a river project is coming. I know there's been great sort of skepticism about like, is this a thing? Is this not a thing? What's happening? I think it's fair to say with a million details and contingencies and caveats that river revitalization is a thing and is going to be coming. And whether it's putting rapids back in the river, shout out to Whitewater back there, or putting trails and greenways between Riverside Park and Millennium Park, whether it's about bringing a museum to the water's edge, whether it's about large civic spaces like amphitheaters and a series of plazas and public spaces. This is all happening. Multi-year, some might argue multi-generational project, multi-million dollar, maybe multi-hundreds of millions of dollars kind of coming into this economy, multi-dimensional, requiring many stakeholders and significant buy-in. This is not a lead agency top-down project. This is you should think of it more as a movement. So this is happening. So the question we're really at is, so who benefits from all of this? It's okay, I get it, big civic project, big infrastructure project. Who benefits from this? Who gets to use and enjoy the river? How can people get there easily, affordably? Who's going to actually take care of the river and the environment itself within all this development? How are youth and the next generation of leadership being involved in what's going on? How can we even trust this project as something that's actually going to be for all Grand Rapidians and residents? So ultimately, end of the day, we're asking, how do we define river equity? And that was sort of the project in which I was brought in to help assist a really good group of people to figure out. How can we make this genuinely a river for all? What is that definition? There are Webster's definitions of equity. This is not going to be that. There's a very large piece of work that in its whole helps define what river equity is. There's also, some of you may have heard, there's a new nonprofit being stood up. It's really in its infancy, but at the end of the day, nonprofit, again, it's not a lead agency, but it's the idea that there needs to be one organization that's at least looking at the big picture of the larger river project, which is not a project, it's 40 to 100 projects and a movement and all these things, but we'll shorten it as a river project. There's an organization being stood up to help try to manage and keep a bird's eye view and to coordinate and convene in what's going on. A little more about that, but it's important to know that it's a national best practice and important for there to be one organization that just looks at that, so that your organizations can focus on the pieces of work that are core to your mission, and then be able to plug into the River Project appropriately. That nonprofit has already as its core directives equity involved, right? So as it was created and birthed, this may be too small to sort of read, but as part of its mission statement, it says it's talking about creating a world-class river for all. It has a core value written in around diversity, equity, inclusion, and noting that the development of the riverfront and the river work needs to be a model for community-driven equitable investment. So that is the charge to the board and one day the staff, presumably if there is any of this organization. It needs to drive access to opportunity. And then there's a specific business plan directive. And this is an organization that hasn't even done anything yet. So like one of its very first directives was to engage community and help define what are equitable outcomes? What is river equity at the end of the day? Let us not sit here in a room and figure that out. Let's get out into community and let community define what a successful outcome for the river is. And that was an initial task that went forward. Those sort of boxes and arrows, I would say that there was a process to that. This was not a sort of closed-door process. There was an engagement and outreach committee of which several members, I believe, are present here today, who ultimately helped scope and select consulting team of which I'm part of, but it's a large team that has both national expertise as well as local players that were involved in that. There was then also stakeholder engagement and oversight. So there were local stakeholder advisors that oversaw the process of engagement and the solicitation of information, also had a level of review and editorial control over the findings in the document. So that was a publicly generated board that was put out for folks and kept us in check in the work we were doing as well. Then a framework was drafted. It was put out back to the community. Did we get this right? More input came in and corrections were made, redrafts were made, and then ultimately a semi-final draft, penultimate draft, a draft, but closer to a final draft has now been put together. And that's why I'm back here today to provide you guys a little sort of top-line briefing of what that says and sort of get you guys a little more what's going on. So we're sort of at that right box now, which looks like it's the end of the process. It's actually the first step in the journey, right? All we're doing is trying to define what is success for what will be a multi-decade process going forward. But that's what I wanted to share with you today. You notice the box says endorsement and implementation is a little bit of not trying to bury the lead. We believe it's very important that the community leaders, like those represented here, ultimately absorb the information in this, endorse it as a set of sort of goals and values that are aligned with their organization, and then find where their organization can play within it. What of these outcomes can they drive and what's going on? If we don't all at some level endorse this and move forward with this, it becomes either a report on a shelf or one of many competing ideas about what could and should happen. And I think the power is in the community and the civic institutions writ large saying, yep, we're agreeing on the same goal. Now just work on the how and what that is. Hey, Ata. Want to let you know sort of that advisory board, if that's the first you hear, like, what is this smoky backfilled room advisory board and who were they and what they did? A number of them are also in the room today, and I want to provide my heartfelt thanks to them for what's going on. This was a publicly open process of community nominations that ultimately then whittled down to a pretty diverse board, and it wasn't a bunch of sort of commissioners and city managers and kingmakers and foundation presidents. It was stakeholders. It was what we believe are people who had different interests, different skill sets, put themselves forward, or other people in the community put them forward. They were not aligned. Nobody knew everybody on that board when we started. It was sort of everyone knows somebody, but not everybody. And then we spent a lot of time together. We spent about 6 months together really working through the process and getting all the way through to the document. Quick shout out, because I see a number of you here, and now I feel like we're all like cousins. If you were on the advisory board, could you just sort of raise your hand so I could just give you a thank you? We appreciate you guys and appreciate you being here. Great. Thank you. You can see the names and all this, I'm sure, will be available at some point in the future. This is really complicated, but I just want to talk a little bit about how we approached the idea of a feedback loop and gaining input. Our team is not a believer, and I think it was accepted here as well, that there's no such thing as sort of one-time input or static input. First of all, community engagement needs to be multi-channel, multi-segment, highly diverse in how it goes about and reaches people where they are, with an intentionality in particular to reach audiences and stakeholders who are not typically asked their opinion. So if you're a leader of an organization and highly sophisticated, you may not have heard as much about this because you're here, right? But how do we get into places and to communities and to languages and to folks who are less easy to reach? And so I think we, one, took that idea of outreach to be broad as well as deep. A feedback loop also implies it's not one time. Well, first of all, it's two ways. Information is going out, people are learning, and information is coming in, input is being received. So it goes it's two-directional, and then it moves over time, right? So at the end of the day, this is the beginning of a conversation, as some of our advisors like to say, that at the end of the day, this is how we started. There are now some really interesting assets out there that we will leave with the Grand Rapids community, whether it's a Facebook page with 750 followers who are retweeting news and has created tens of thousands of impressions, or it's a website, or it's significant listservs, text threads. We have a variety of ways that we're already connecting with the community about people who have identified themselves as being interested in the river. That work continues and needs to continue, especially with a project of this length. So there's a lot going on. There is workshops, there is many interviews individually. A number of folks in these rooms had this really around more implementers. Folks would say, hey, if we wanted to do this, how would your organization interface with this? Whether it was around workforce, or if it was around park development, or if it was around small business development, in various ways. So I thank those of you in the room and beyond who took those interviews, those notes and whatnot were also incorporated in what was going on. The advisory board, I would note what I'm most proud about the advisory board, which was diverse and does not have a uniform point of view about river development, ultimately unanimously endorsed this document. And not only did they endorse it, they endorsed it in writing with their signature, and that statement of endorsement is actually the first page of the equity document. So that was perhaps the first step in many of people getting comfortable with the content and then ultimately agreeing to stand behind it in a way that essentially will help it become a fait accompli. It will be set. This will be the standard by which we will measure ourselves going forward, and we're willing to hold that up. And I think the broader that set of endorsements becomes, the more powerful, quite frankly, the document becomes. This is just a short quote from that statement of endorsement. And by the way, this document, both in a 2-minute executive summary form and a 2-hour, 90-page full document form, will become available to you very shortly. So I don't want you to think I'm hiding the ball, but I did want to quote at least one statement from that I think really sums up the process and the fact that we feel pretty good about what happened. The advisory board wrote, "We confidently state this document is a community-led, credible, and implementable strategy for achieving greater regional equity in conjunction with pending investments in the Grand River Corridor." So the sourcing of the content is not top-down, it's bottom-up. It also reflects the collection of, quite frankly, years to decades of past river outreach that has been in various documents. That was all distilled and created, and then a solid 6 to 8 months of additional updating input was added and integrated into that as well. And so there is a feeling that it's also credible. It's not ideological. It's not pie in the sky. It's something that we believe is a stretch that needs to be leaned into, but is eminently accomplishable. And that was the goal. For those who don't like the quote and want a little more, like I said, there's basically about a 90-page document that's both deep and wide, right? So it has vision and value statements and 6 thematic goals that I will be briefing you on shortly, as well as 15 strategies that flow from those 6 goals, and then gets down into like hundreds of action steps and recommended things that your organizations may be interested or already are doing or may want to plug into some of those things within, sorted by those goals. It also suggests, and I'll brief you on today, a series of what we call priority outcomes that are a little more specific. That is sort of the things we would like to see. If we're going to put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we'd like to see over time manifest out of this river project, some of those will be in there as well. And I'll get into as many of those as time allows today. But I would suggest that that's a good place if you want to see something tangible, is to look at those priority outcomes, which are part of the executive summary, so you have a good sense of what we're shooting for. Then there's a lot more of what I'd call the asterisks down there of like, we're doing our homework, right? And so there's a glossary of terms for people who are more or less familiar with the equity lexicon or river lexicon, both of which are sort of terminologies. It details sort of at fairly great length what our engagement process was for those who may not feel that it was authentic or deep enough. It actually runs through a history of Grand Rapids and the historical context of why intentional equity work is necessary in this region for folks who maybe don't know some of that history or need to be reminded about it a little bit. So there's a lot in there, and there's appendices and all sorts of stuff as well. But I think the document should be able to be a standalone document that will stand the test of time. All right, let's get to the summary. Enough of the level setting. 6 goals. 6 is a good number. Hopefully you can remember 6. We believe that we can encapsulate our definition of river equity in 6. Another one of my advisory board members coming in. Hi, Dr. Julie. In 6 goals, we can define what river equity is. Real quickly, and I don't know, can you guys maybe raise a show of hands from the back? Can you actually see that? Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, goal 1, equitable economic development. Functionally, this speaks to who benefits from the substantial commercial investment in the river, whether we're talking about jobs, contracts and small firm work, even the nature of the built development, meaning how is housing and commercial corridors and planning documents, overlays and land uses, how is that spread, and how do we make sure that those economic and commercial benefits are spread equitably throughout the region? And this is not just a downtown project. This is just not a affluent segment of Grand Rapids, but there's broad diffusal of the commercial benefits of the river project. 2, goal 2, an accessible river. This speaks to the physical access by everyone to the river itself. That could be everything from the development of connection points and access to the trail system. If I'm a 7-year-old boy and on a bike, can I get on a bike safely and get on a non-motorized path and go all the way downtown safely and come back? Can that be my existence if I live on the south side? Where are those connection points? How do we remove that? How do people safely access the river front and the water itself? Whether that's a discussion about ownership of the shoreline and access to the river banks, or if that's about physical safety, right? Sort of at the end of the day, how does one get close to the river without becoming trapped or hurt by it? And so how can we physically access the river in an equitable way? All people, regardless of their physical abilities, their income, their comfort with water, how can they access the river, and how can that be part of the built plan? Goal 3 speaks to the programming and the activation of the river itself. At the end of the day, are there activities regularly there? Are they free or low cost? Are they culturally relevant for all of Grand Rapids? What is happening there? What music is being played? How do we avoid the trap of large segments of our area thinking, the river's not for me. That's people from my neighborhood don't go to the river. How do we program this so this becomes the premier destination, not just for outside the region, but also for Grand Rapidians? So how do we program that, and how do we create amenities that are useful for everyone? Do we need a restroom every half mile? So if I'm walking with a toddler, I know that I have a place to stop and rest. Where's my internet Wi-Fi? Where are the things that I need to make this an enjoyable day at the river? It speaks to that as well. Goal 4, a healthy river and community, speaks to the environmental aspects. There's always a natural conflict between the built environment and buildings and ecology, the health of the land, the health of the water, the plants and species involved in that. This is not an either or a conflict. This is our built development needs to incorporate strong green stormwater infrastructure and modern day techniques. The hard work in the channel itself around invasive species and the reintroduction of native plants, fish, that work going forward. How do we integrate that in a way that this river becomes cleaner? There's a river report card telling everyone here very easily what's the water quality like, and is it improving? Is it degrading? Is it equitable across all aspects upstream and downstream of the river, and how are we addressing environmental justice issues? So goal 4 is really environmental, where the true stakeholder is Mama Pacha, or sort of is Mother Earth herself. Goal 5 speaks to the temporal aspect of this. At the end of the day, a project of this length and significance is not a singular generational effort. Even if everyone here is on board and we all work really hard for the next 20 years, but we don't bring along the next generations and have them feel a level of understanding, ownership, stewardship of the river, we have failed. This has to be an organizing principle going forward. We need to build comfort, love, and loyalty to the river amongst our youth. That's everything from our truly young ones learning to play and learn at the river. And there's some great programming that already exists, sort of supersizing that and really making sure that everyone from all within Kent County really understands the history and the importance of the river. As you get older, and you're a young adult, maybe a high schooler, how can you get a job? How can you work? How can you become an intern along the river? How can you sort of start, as you're sort of finding yourself, see the opportunities around the river and see that as an interesting and viable path going forward? And then, of course, I will call it leadership development at the end of the day. How do we authentically give our youth a platform and a vehicle to make decisions about the river and what happens on the river, so that going forward, that next generation of leaders comes forward and really the handoff is fairly seamless about who are the champions for the river going forward. Goal 6 is really about the infrastructure, implementation and accountability. At the end of the day, significant skepticism, siloed behaviors, we can use whatever words we want, but how do we know that something of this magnitude is going to go beyond rhetoric, is going to go beyond the words in this slide deck and actually happen going forward? That's really an exercise of, one, I think the standing up of a new nonprofit that really embeds equity into their governance and into their mission and into their activities. I think it speaks to data collection and transparency in that data collection around all of these goals. How are we doing? Is there a public and transparent scorecard that's brought out and shown to everyone about how we are performing against these stated goals? And then thirdly, where's the accountability? What are the repercussions for that? At the end of the day, do we grade I know in real life a lot of times we do this, but do we grade ourselves on how well we're doing? That's usually not the best way to have this happen. Or are there independent bodies of stakeholders who've espoused these ideas and then receive data who ultimately can say how we're doing, not in a spirit of retribution or shaming, but in a spirit of continuous improvement? We don't expect these benefits to come on day 1, on year 1, on year 5. But over time, we can create the city and the region we want through the lens of the river, especially if we're honest with ourselves about what outcomes we're generating, which times we're hitting our goals and which times we aren't. So those are the 6 goals that if there was anything to remember, I would say that's how the organizing principles around what we believe river equity, and by we, I mean the community, I'm really just the scribe, what we believe river equity is going forward. Now, from those 6 goals, that's sort of the what we'd like to see. There's 15 strategies that go a little more into how we think we can get there. And at the end of the day, you can see some of here. I won't go into all of them for interest of time, but these are also part of even just the executive summary that everyone should read. On economic development, it's around jobs, around targeting and supporting small businesses and firms in the region to plug in, as well as connecting the equity framework and river policy into planning documents and other more institutional parameters for development. In goal 2, it's around creating those connections and a lot of cool open and public spaces, not a lot of privatized spaces around the river. It's about programming and safety and water quality and leaning in on environmental justice work, especially happening Plaster Creek and in places here on the south side, other places as well. Youth activities, and then on accountability, really a 3-part series of strategies around creating that nonprofit and creating it correctly and in a way that reflects the strategy. Building a broad base of endorsements, these sort of educational conversations are part of that, and then creating that infrastructure for accountability, which we sort of envision as a bit of an independent commission that sort of reviews progress over time. So those strategies are there as well, and those are things that hopefully will resonate with you and your mission, your organizations. I'm not going to go ahead and read them. But what I do want to do, because it's a little more tangible, is get a little more involved in what I call those priority outcomes. Like, okay, if we do all this and then there's lots of activities and we're doing stuff, what would we like to see down the road? What is our, not a quota, not a mandate, but what would we like to see? Let's put it out there. Like what we'd like to see. What's the change we would like to see out there in Grand Rapids? And I'd like to spend a little time with you all kind of previewing those and then probably opening it up for a more two-way conversation. Economic development, equitable economic development. We actually set forth percentages for both local hire, targeted hire, which we may refer to as sort of BIPOC, low income, reentry populations, sort of vulnerable populations on all city and county contracts. Talking about a widening of the MLBE and sort of the bench of available firms that can be pulled from, into really sort of investing and cultivating in those lists and those databases and the capacities. It speaks about spend goals. So sometimes we measure things by how many hours or how many firms. Sometimes we just need to measure by how many dollars moved into targeted populations. So we measure it in a number of different ways. Also speaks to, I think, implementation within the master plan update. That some of these equity notions are sort of built in to documents that ultimately become enacted and become part of the civic framework of what's going on. And about an updated sort of river overlay. So the specific planning around the immediate edges of the river and whatnot, that they really reflect these goals and are enacted in a more formal way. On physical access for either our park builders or maybe some of our public agency folks, whatnot going forward, we're talking about 40 new miles of bike lanes and trails, public transit connections that may or may not exist, especially from the south side, getting up to an activation of as much as 1 million unique river visitors, right? With the vast majority of those not being tourists, being Kent County residents coming to enjoy their own river. Increase in active transportation. 100% of the river's edge that is currently publicly owned remaining a public asset, not privatizing publicly owned land along the river. Working on some, we could call it previously inaccessible shoreline, probably the shoreline is maybe privately owned land. Are there ways that we can open up easements and access as landowners along the river have that? The idea would be almost like, I'm from California, on the beach is open to everybody. Now, the access points might be a little different, but at the end of the day, you can sort of walk the entire California coastline for the most part. And that level of public access is sort of what we're shooting for at the river. 50 acres of new or renovated park space, the urban core, and 200 acres of new riverfront park space across Kent County. The provision of transfer of some dedicated land to indigenous tribal communities. I think there's both, when we think of like a Nobbin Park or something, there's places where we can all go and learn a little more about our history and what's going on, and that's important. We believe it's also important, not in the urban core, that there's truly private space for ceremonies for our First Peoples who've been waiting for a long time for that, working through that. And then we're striving to a design standard of universal access, so getting beyond ADA approved or sort of a minimum bar, but allowing folks who are not active swimmers and hikers and young, letting everyone find ways to get to the river's edge and to enjoy it in their own way. There's some passive aspects of the river design. There's some more active aspects so that we really feel that this is a river for all and everyone can literally get all the way to the river. Goal 3, a significant number of events, an increase of events at the river. Those events and what they are will have a draw that's highly diverse. So at the end of the day, as we measure who's coming to the river, the demographics of who's coming to the river match the demographics of the region. It's not a river for some segments of the region, it's for everyone. New educational art and safety signage, so installations along the river that make it a little more interactive and a little more interpretive so folks can learn as they're there. Public wellness facilities are sort of restrooms on steroids with all sorts of amenities that are at periodic spaces. We have a goal of 90% of all Kent County youth can swim or can get to a water safety class for free, or at least have access to it. We want to make Grand Rapids and Kent County a swimming municipality. Everyone here swims or just chooses not to of their own accord. But at the end of the day, that's something that isn't that way fully today, and we'd like to make that something. Pending a number of things that have to happen first, we'd like to repeal the prohibition of swimming in the river. We'd like that to be something that that happens, and that from a safety point of view, everyone feels safe and welcome at the river. That may be a discussion of what public safety means, and I don't think it's ever going to be a police presence at the river, but how do we have ambassadors? How does everyone feel safe at all times of the river, and what does that mean? Goal 4. There's an interest in a report card, a publicly created and published report card on water quality and other environmental indices, so that's something, whether it's like the surf report or we have water quality reports, I know in Los Angeles where we have problems with pollution flowing downstream, where everyone can see at any given time what's the water quality and what is it at different points along the river. Reintroduction of key species, including sturgeon, native plants, increasing the tree canopy to 40% along the river corridor. All new public and private projects incorporate either sort of Western world green stormwater infrastructure or traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, sort of historic practices to preserve land, to deal with flood control, and to infiltrate our water back into our land. An active enforcement across the entire region of sort of regulatory and pollution regulations, which we are not sure how evenly at the moment they are, but really sort of getting after that. And then the last goal I think is pretty relevant as well, is enhanced partnerships with Southside communities around the environmental justice initiatives that are already happening. I think there's some really good work happening. I think it needs to be activated or further expanded and really energized. There's numerous places where that might happen, but I think the Plaster Creek and what's going on there is a great example of a great place to start, and I know folks are doing great work there. Goal 5, around engaged and supported youth. This is everything from increasing the number of field trips from low-income and communities of colors to the river, to the corridor, getting that exposure, introducing or continuing environmental studies curriculum at public and all schools in the county, where you start to teach things like what is stormwater, what is pollution, what's climate change, but using the Grand River as the case study for those things, not having it being a sort of hypothetical scenario, but getting people to start learning about the Grand River in a more detailed fashion. Letting youth plan some of their own events on the river, giving them the space to own it and to do things their way, instead of us old fuddy-duddies like myself who have bright ideas that always seem to fall flat. I'd mentioned this notion of summer river ambassadors or river interns, allowing young adults to find real roles and experiment with roles along the river as perhaps a partnership with some of corporations and others in the area, especially around the summer when I think kids should be outside. If we can bring them to the river, that would be fantastic. River posts, social media presence, allow a voice to evolve that is more youth-friendly over time. We also envision a River Youth Leadership Council. I don't know if that's another brand new council or that's an evolution of one of your organization's councils, but at the end of the day, leadership development thematically around the river is something that we believe we need to see as well going forward. And lastly, around implementation accountability, we sort of talked about these as well. The standing up of that river nonprofit and making sure that in their founding documents and directives, the river equity framework is really front and center in a lot of what they're trying to do. And they as an independent actor, are really sort of exhibit 1A in the larger movement. But they also can act as a facilitator, collector of information, report out, can do a lot of the sort of staffing and backbone work associated with facilitating your good programmatic work. The endorsement, and we're starting with some of this now, but the endorsement of this framework by a broad set of unlikely bedfellows. So this is everything from public sector to private sector to nonprofits to both sides of the political spectrum. In a number of ways, people are down with the goals and the strategies that are higher level, and then people can find ways to plug into what's going on. And I'll get a little bit more to that and how that might relate to your organization in a second. And then this notion of seeking some sort of an independent stakeholder body to sort of review progress over time and be able to issue recommendations, findings, help continue to the spirit of improvements. Not, again, as I said, a sort of policing a body in a sort of punitive sort of way, but as a way of a forum by which transparent data can come forward and people can say, how are we doing against our goals and how can we do better? You know, gosh, I didn't think we would, but we're doing great against our local hiring goals and our local spend, but the water quality in the river has dropped substantially. And we need to, why is that happening? What are we doing about that? Or we really aren't engaging youth, or we are engaging youth, but our jobs are down. Allowing that some sort of a dashboard that's publicly available and people can discuss what's going on. Last point, and then I'm going to sort of open it up for folks for comments or questions or whatnot. What's the next step? What is, assuming that once you see this and have a chance to test, you're like, okay, that seems reasonable. I think our organization or our agency or me individually are down and aligned with that vision and values and goals. What are some of the things we're asking of our community partners and leaders that are here today and beyond? One is consider publicly endorsing the framework. We believe that unless there is a groundswell of endorsement by a variety of different types of parties, at the end of the day, this loses some steam, right? At the end of the day, these are ideas. This is the work lies ahead of us. So whether if it's the city or the county or the foundations or the activists or the corporations or the developers, at the end of the day, if a broad set of people publicly endorse this, it becomes a mandate. And at the end of the day, at that point, it cannot really be ignored. If we allow ourselves to divide and silo ourselves, much easier for people to sort of pick and choose how they want to address the river equity question. Next, of course, is walk the talk within your job, within your organization. You all know what you do. I know what a number of you do. Very diverse and very skilled in what y'all do. At the end of the day, how does this align with what you're doing day to day, with your mission, your strategy, your programs, and your work? What parts of this are interesting to you? Is it around the economics and the business development or the land? Is it around youth development? Is it around environmental stewardship? At the end of the day, think about your organization, challenge your staff to say, how would we get involved in some of this? What are we already doing? What could we be doing or should we be doing? Is there a partnership here that should be happening? Try to apply it to your own organization. 3, simply advocate to other people, to the folks who are not here, the folks who are listening to us here today. Ultimately, encourage them to come along. Encourage them to make this a movement and a mandate. And then going forward, sharing your successes is really important. This is not, as I mentioned in the beginning, this is not a top-down or lead agency model. We're not asking the city to do this, asking one nonprofit to do this. This is about all of us collectively contributing to shared and defined success metrics and outcomes. And so as we are doing things, feed that in. We will be working on an infrastructure to collect that data so that so that then we can present it out writ large as a movement. So for one example, in equitable economic development, we talked about jobs and sort of job creations. There might be 5 or 6 big projects, big river projects in pre-development right now that we'll be combining over time. Each of them is important, but what's really important is collectively, what can they do and how do we pull that data together and then assess how we're doing overall against the goals that we've stated. So that sort of sense of data aggregation, transparency, and presentation out to the community for honest comment and improvement, that's what we're looking for. And so there will be an infrastructure for that, but there will ultimately be a role for all the contributors to the movement to share what they're doing and how it's contributing to what's going on. That was a lot, I know, so I want to just sort of apologize for blathering on like that for a while. This is just, as a reminder, these are sort of the goals and strategies. So this is sort of at the executive summary level. This is what you would see along with those priority outcomes. And then in the larger document, there's substantially more detail in what's going on. But I just want to thank you once again for your time.